Awesome. I think it's coming up finally. Just give me a quick second so I can save the link. Awesome. Okay, I have it. So next I'm gonna share screen on my IPython notebook and you can follow along with me. So let me see, let me know if you can see my IPython notebook now. You can type in the text message. Is this font look okay or it's too small? Sorry, in our workshop, because we have had accident with anonymous attendee, so if you're gonna put your anonymous name there, I have to remove you from our workshop. So as I mentioned, now you should update with your real name in the session. Yeah, so we do offer financing and scholarship. We offer PhD level scholarship, also female in data science scholarship. Each of them is about $1,500. You can apply the scholarship to your tuition directly. We give out limited seat of scholarship. Any question? Oh, it's a bit small. Okay, I can make it bigger. Let me know if it's better. Sound good? Yeah, let me know it's font if the font looks better now. Cool. I should already answer all the questions in the open channel. Let me know if I miss any question. Otherwise, we're good to go. So I see people type their experience. Some of you have more than 5 years experience. That's really good. So today we're gonna discuss about best practice in Python. So let's start with formatting and construct your code. So there is a common saying you're gonna read your code more than you write your code. So make your code really feasible for reading pleasure, and the logical understanding is very important because many times you're gonna collaborate with other people on your team project. Also, you're also gonna read other people's work and try to build upon that. So we're gonna cover a lot of topics today. I imagine we can cover about 50 to 60% of all the topic we have here because it's so much here. This is one of the sessions we teach in the bootcamp. So I don't imagine we will be able to have enough time to cover everything, but we will see how far we can get to. Okay, feel free to ask any question along the way. So I don't know how many of you have experience with GitHub. Many times. Yes. So the question is, can we get a link to the notebook or even review the file? Yes. After the event, we usually will send a follow-up email to you guys. That's how you can get this. Okay. So yeah, I hope everyone get a chance to update your name here. That would be a huge help. Thank you. Okay, so let's look into the detail. There is a very commonly known style called PEPs, P-E-P-S. So if you import this in your command line, it's gonna show you a poetry about Python. Beautiful is better than ugly. Explicit is better than implicit. Simple is better than complex. Complex is better than complicated. So that's basically our guideline, how to write the code. And we can look into how exactly it's unfolded. Okay, So let's first looking at all the naming conventions. So if you've been writing code, you probably notice all the languages have its own naming convention. In Python, the single under case, do you know what usually it's used for? I can highlight what I'm talking about, the single lowercase. So most oftenly, single lowercases is used for creating variables. For example, x equal to 1, y equal to 2. But this is not the best use. When you start to work with other people, you should make more descriptive names. For example, this new object is a list. You can say my underscore list. So through reading the lowercase object, people can know what exactly you're referring to, what kind of data structure it is. And your target variable, if you're writing a regression, so you can write y as a commonly shared understanding of a target variable. Single uppercase usually saved for when you use for matrix. When you're training a machine learning model, your feature set is capital X. This is to present your feature is two-dimensional matrix, not a single column vector. Because matrix have many features, so it's easier to pick up what data object you're working with. Lowercase with underscore, use when you have a variable you want to describe with one word or multiple. Uppercase with underscore, like we can say speed underscore of underscore light, or like pi, py, or pi. Any of them have very specific meanings. It's usually uppercase is reserved for a constant number. Okay. So we also commonly use something called a capitalized word. It's also known as a camel case. So camel case is used for classes. So you want to define a class like Apple, you will do a uppercase, P, Ple lowercase, or you can define a class called my book. And in this data object, you can define a lot of attributes and methods, like my book name, my editor's name, my book's content. Then you can open the book to read, you can quote things from the book. And the last one is mixed case. Mixed case is actually not often used in Python. It's more like a Java convention. Okay. Next, we want to look into more complicated structure. First one is the single leading underscore. Single leading underscore is a very weak internal use indicator. So for example, if you want to import something, you can say from modules import something. You can also do single trailing underscore. It's not particularly a special case. So you can create a variable with the same name as the keyword. So for example, trim is a reserved keyword in Python. But if you still want to use trim as a function call, you can use trim underscore to show the different, it's a reserved word, but here you also want to use it as a potential object or function call. It's allowed. We also have double leading underscore. It's actually invoke our naming Mongoling. So if we're working with class and defining attributes, we can define attribute within a class. It cannot be touched by the user. So it's only internal and work under the hook, and people cannot manipulate this anymore. So for example, inside of the class full bar, you can do double leading underscore. Then it's actually indeed is underscore full bar underscore bool. So only internal function can use this definition. You can also do double leading and trailing underscore. So this is called the magic function. The special function lets do a specific thing. So for example, we can have class 1 equal to 1 to 3. My list 1 to equal to 1 to 3. And also my list 2 equal to 4, 5, 6. If we add the two lists together, it's basically a concatenation operation. When you add them together, you get new list called 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This particular add function, it's a new operator. But how does Python know the plus sign means we want to concatenate two lists together? That's because we explicitly define a function called underscore add right here. And when you call this plus function, it's indeed calling the underneath function add function. So when you apply operator plus sign, the magic function underscore add and underscore is brought in as a magic function. So it's specifically useful when we want to change how operator works when we create a new class. So for example, if you're not working with list, you're working with other data object, then you can redefine the plus sign. You can do element-wise plus. So for example, when you redefine the plus sign, it can be, in our example, 1 plus 4, 2 plus 5, 3 plus 6. Instead of concatenating the list, you can change the behavior to element-wise operation. Okay. Any question regarding the naming convention? Chris has a question about what about initial. The initial function is the same as add function. So you can populate this project object by initial function. So you can create like default value. For example, you want to create a car object, you can use initial to say, okay, how heavy the car is, whether it's an electricity car or a normal car, or how many wheels it has, how many glass it has, what are special feature about this. So this is you can predefine this in the function definition. So most likely, if you are beginner level, you only probably have seen this portion of the definition: single lowercase, single uppercase, lowercase, lowercase with underscore, uppercase with underscore, camel case, and mixed case. But you become more advanced and start to write your own class, quote other people's class, very likely you're going to start to see single leading underscore, single trailing underscore, double leading underscore, double leading and trailing underscore. Does that make sense? Any question? Chris asked a question about private. I actually haven't seen private used often. When you use Java, you definitely use a lot of private and public, but I haven't seen this very commonly used in Python. I think, Chris, you're coming from a Java background, is that right? Okay, great. Let's keep moving on to names to avoid. So we should not use a single character as lowercase letter EL, uppercase O, and uppercase I. Because based on the font you're using, those is very indistinguishable from number 0 and number 1. It's better to use uppercase I and uppercase L. So it's easier to differentiate the difference between each of them. And you should also avoid to use built-in function like the class name as the variable name. So if you are using a trailing underscore, if you must, do not override it. So if you set a list as 1, 2, 3, and you should try to use and you can, if you try to use the list function, it will not be called because you define your class name as the variable name. It's really hard for Python to tell what is gonna work, what is not gonna work. And in order to make it work again, you have to shut down your namespace, reset your namespace, rerun the kernel. So this is kernel. If you accidentally rewrite the class name as your variable name or function call, you have to start the kernel to load the default definition again. So try not do this rewrite. Okay, so next is the module and packages. Modules should all have lowercase name. Use underscore if it's readability. Modules is just a text file with .py file. For example, you can create a module by calling a function, calling a new file called mymodule.py file. You can add a short function inside the file. For example, you want to define a function called add2, and it's return x plus 2. You input parameter being x. Once you save this py file, you can always reuse this function by importing my module. When you use my module, you can say my module.add2. And for the x portion, you can put any number you want to add to. So for example, I can say my module.add2 and parentheses 5. Then I will get a result of 7. So if you start to become so much better in Python, you should start to think about how to better organize your code by modulize the code you have done. So for example, you have a lot of clean code. You don't just want to have them on the top of your notebook. You should define them as an in module and quote call them in your notebook. It saves a lot of work. So for example, you deal with text file. A lot of time you need to clean the trailing space, like all the starting 0, all the ending 0. You can write a function called clean space. And every time you start a new text file, you can just load your module to do all the cleaning for you. So really depends on what you do for profession. There are a lot of places you can optimize your efficiency and pre-package the code you use all the time. Okay. So next is the packages. So packages should have lowercase name, underscore. So for example, when you load scikit-learn, it's import sklearn, all lowercase. You should differentiate your module and packages. Packages can contain many modules and even other packages. But modules should be like standalone py file. Okay, awesome. Any question? Okay, no problem. Let's move on to variable. So variable and function name should always be lowercase. We mentioned earlier, like matrix or constants numbers should be presented by all capital letters. Additionally, like lowercase I, lowercase j, lowercase k should be reserved to present index value. If you know anything about linear algebra, they are called basic vector. You can do a quick Googling to see what basic vector means. And also X, Y, Z are commonly accepted for used as coordination, coordinates. So usually you don't redefine I, J, K or X, Y, Z. And I also use as an incremental variable. So if you write while loop, for loop, you usually use I. So you don't use this type of variable for any of your production code as X. Like these are commonly accepted user cases. Okay. So we want to break into bad and code example. Bad cells usually doesn't mean to run because it causes problem. So you should focus on the content of cells, make sure the cell runs. Bad code, when you try to improve it, you want to make your bad code be more descriptive. You want to give all your variable and function descriptive name, so you and other can recall what they do. Also, you want to return index, the value of the object, so you can always keep track on what are you doing and how you're utilizing it. So, for example, when you say for x and y in enumerate z, it's really a bad choice of variable. You can say index and the item, so you really know what you're printing from iterate through this object. And this is a lot of bad example. So define function. This function doesn't have a real name. People don't know what it does. You can change it to x square as a function name. And as I mentioned, try to avoid use L, because lowercase l looks like 1. You might mistyping 1 or don't know what's going on. And this one, this variable name is so long, list of values to hold. You can just say my underscore list. And this is bad because list is a reserved word as a class name. If you redefine it, then your old list class is redefined, and you have to shut down your kernel and rerun your kernel in order to get a class object back. And camel case is used for class objects. This variable cannot be camel case. Okay, and we also have a bunch of good examples, like all the variables have very clear idea what they present. Text, price, total price. We have constant value, pi. We have reserved speed of light. It's like all fixed. You can define a function to clearly say what does it do. Price after text. You can return price and text. You can also define like example list, iterate through the index and the value. So everything is so much clearer if you take this practice. Any questions? Okay, let's look into the class and object, class method and argument. So class name should use capital words and or we also call it camel case, because camel case have humps in the lower side. So it's almost like multiple camel hump. There are still exceptions to it, but for the most of the time, you should follow this convention. Object method should always use self as the first argument. If another object will be called in this function, the other object need to be referred as others. And class method can always use CLS as the first argument. So we have another set of good and bad we can compare. So first one, Python vector. So we just said the class name should be camel case. So this is lowercase, uppercase, so it's a bad naming convention. Second portion, when you compare the initial, we mentioned initial function have to take self as the first argument. And here we have obj as the first object. So this is wrong, actually. Next one, when we compare equal, it's another wrong naming convention. This function should take self as the first variable and take others as the second variable. So this has to be self and others. Because you're pointing back to what this object is, which presented by self. So object or object one have to be updated into self. And if you are taking another variable, it has to be other, just introduced as here. And the last one is from string function. So this from string function looks like some argument, but class method have to use CLS as first argument because you are referring back to this class. So if you want to call some object and call a function of this class, the first quoted argument have to be CLS, otherwise it will not work. Okay, then let's see how this class is tested. Some weird class object. This is another place it's wrong. So you should return a CLS as your object. It's not like this way. Some argument as flow list. The first one has to be CLS. That's why this need to be return CLS as flow list. Okay, so you can see this return is returning for the from string function, which is wrong because when you form a class, it should return an instant. So the return should be go into the main class. And this one looks really weird. Class some weird class pass. So when you do side-by-side comparison, you kind of like know what went wrong with this, and you can improve to the standard version. You want to utilize all the great features already predefined, like self CLS, so things become easier. A lot of automation and automation is done based on this structure. If you follow through closely, you will get the best outcome. Okay, so let's move on to documentation if no more question. So Chris raised a question, when do you use a class method or static method? Is a class method decorator needed? I think a lot of questions you asked it is really related to Java. In Java, you have static method. But in Python, you don't differentiate public, private, or static. A class decorator is needed because you want to use a decorator to generate an instant. Cool. Okay. Thank you for the question. Next, let's move on to documentation. So that's the big part about how you can become really, really good coder. When you code your work, consider your documentation as a mini instruction manual. So you want to have a big chunk of the function of your code, what it expects as input and what the user should expect as output. I have forgot which packages, but it can automatically extract your documentation portion and turn this into a menu. So if you follow through this format, you can automatically generate a menu for your packages. And commenting is also a great habit if you want to explain your thinking process and what each piece of the code is doing. Just be careful between the fine line from not enough documentation or over documenting. So you don't want your code look like 90% are all documentation, only 10% is code. Then that doesn't make sense. Okay. Next, I want to introduce the document string. It's usually a long string, looks like this. You have 3 quota and the 3 quote here. So it's used to describe what a function, method, and class does. The doc string should not describe how a function or a class work, rather than what it does and how to use it. So this needs to be the first line beneath the class, method, and the function definition. So let's take a look of example. This example shows showing both class and method within the class. It's written for a function the same way as it's written for a method. So in this class, the dog class, this class presents a pet dog. The dog object has the following attributes. You have a name, it's a string. You have the break, it's a string. You have age, it's an integer. And you can also have the following method: initial, string, and dog year. So the same idea right underneath of the function, you have the document string. Initialize a dog object, arguments, return. And you can initialize all the internal attributes: self.name, self.age, self.break. You can define a string, return the string presentation of the dog object. You can return dog's name, break, and age. You can walk the dog. You can return the dog year. So after you define the class and the initial function, string function, walk the dog function, dog year function, this will call the string function, this will call the walk the dog function, and this will call the dog initial function. So all of them will be successfully executed. And the dog string function really help you to read this in the future if you got confused. This is probably one of the most easy example you can find in a class. Oftentimes, if you work for a tech giant like Meta, Amazon, you're gonna write hundreds of code like this. So good documentation is definitely required. Okay, let's see how we comment on code. So use comments to highlight proportion of the code. It could be potentially unclear. I got a question: what VS Code and Jupyter extension or shortcut can automatically generate the code? I don't think it can be automatically generate the doc string. Are you thinking about just generating the 3 quotation mark? That's potentially possible, but it doesn't cost like much effort to really write it yourself. I'm sure people might ask for that already and they're already made, but I just usually type them out and make sure I have right indentation. Okay, defining factorial function. It takes this argument, it returns this portion. So based on this documentation, we can get this function return. And the function name question mark gonna bring up your doc string. So it's really helpful to have doc string for any function you write. Okay, so one very important thing to pay attention to the documentation, make sure the spacing is consistent. You can tell everything have very consistent space here. Also, you should read the punctuate. You should remove any punctuation to avoid counting the words differently. And make sure all the spacing are exactly the same way. Okay. Another key takeaway, I introduced PAP 20. One other standard we use often is called PAP 8. PAP 8 usually suggests no more than 79 characters on a single line because it's gonna be very tedious for people to read such a long line, and you should try to write each step per line. So if you have super nested condition, you can use backslash to try to separate different condition in different line. You want to make sure each line is so easy to read. Okay, let's look at some examples, how we can write beautiful code. Okay, Chris, you just Google. Chris said single quotation mark, single quotation mark, single quotation mark, and enter is the shortcut for VS Code. Okay, so I guess it's really depends on what you use. Okay, let's look at how can we write beautiful code. So the syntax is about you need to bring things into logical sector. No line have way too much character. You have indentation, you have backslash. You kind of like help the user to read your code and parsing your text into different line. So it's easier to understand what you try to achieve. And let's look at the space here. Bad and good. So this is, did you see there no space before the equal sign? And there no space before and after the equal sign, but the second good version have consistency around the space before and after the equal sign. The same idea with plus, you want to always leave space in and the before and after. And if you pay attention to the input parameters, this one have extra space, which is not a good practice. Yeah, this one doesn't have function docstring. This one have a docstring, and there's no space before the for loop. So punctuationless for loop, then space. And you have one line of comments about what this portion does, another 2-line comments what this portion does. So it reads really naturally what each portion of the code is doing, while I have a docstring to explain what this function does. So when you read this and read this formatting is so much better. So a lot of the time people ask you for a GitHub, they naturally gonna check your coding style. If you write code like this, most likely either you're not very careful with your code or you are not experienced. So if people see you write code this way, most likely they're gonna pass you. But if you write code much cleaner this way, then this is so much better to promote your work. Okay, also you can see this version is very crowded. You don't have any space between the line. This one have space before for this section and the space for this section. So it's very clear how logic is breaking into different sections. And this one is what I mentioned, like when you have such long thing, you have to separate it. So what essentially is doing now is generating a data range and try to compute something. So if you redefine the data range, simplify what it does, and do a for loop on different line, it's more comprehensible. Even this line and this line is doing the same thing. Okay, hope you get the idea how to break things into smaller bite size. Another example, when you split a statement, make sure the operators come first. So if you have them randomly here, there, it's really hard to see which part you're missing things. But if you consistently put operator in the front, that would be the best practice. And for this example, you can write function call, argument 1, argument 2, argument 3, argument 4. The indentation is showing there are function argument. But if you put here, it's really hard to tell which part does line belong to. So this indentation is really helping you to read the code faster and write code more accurate. Okay, next one, let's look at using keywords. I got question, do I prefer list comprehension to loop due to speed? I always try to avoid loops because computation time-wise, it's so much slower. I will use loop 100% when I have no other choices. Okay. Okay, let's keep going on if you don't have other questions. Keywords. Python use special keywords. So these are it's called logical operator. And now not is flipping the logical value. If you have a not true, it's gonna flip into false. This is a judgment call, it's yes. So for example, we can call is none and see whether this is missing data. Okay. So it's very human being readable. Let's compare bad and good. So and is replaced by and, or is here, not is here. The same idea, and or. So it makes the logic more human being interpretable. Okay, next. So we have conditions. We have condition not equal to true, condition not equal to false. So this one is really interesting because condition 1 not equal to false and condition 2 is false. So not equal to false, this is true. Equal to false, this is true. So this will run. But instead of using this comparison, we should use choose value. So you can use choose value condition 1 or condition 2. So we can just bring the value true or false here instead of doing comparison. You can just spit it out. Next, I want to introduce some help function. So we often write function to have multiple operator. You want to understand what's going on internally in the function. So in order to make the code more readable, we introduce helper function. So it has smaller portion of your overall goal. You kind of like solve them piece by piece, then put them together. So let's look at the bad one first, always, then we see the good one. So this function is called guess number. While it's true, try this. While this is less than upbound, do this. Then print your hidden number is this. And in this example, we actually have get check bounds. We have ask a question. We have the guess number. So guess number is calling check. Guess number is calling get checkpoint. So we went inside the checkpoint. And based on the answers we get from the prompt, we can decide whether we should guess higher or lower. So based on you getting true, if you answer too low, it's telling you, oh, no, it's not right. You should try something higher. So it's actually very useful. So you can break down this function more effectively and call function to another function to simplify the logic. Okay, I think we're pretty much run out of space. We finished part 1, which is quite significant. I got a lot of great questions here, so really appreciate your active participation. Again, if you have any question to us, you can write to admissions@nycdatascience.com to follow up with us. I can take one more question before we wrap up. We have a question about modularization. What is the use of the empty initial file? Can we write code in this file? Absolutely. The initial function is to generate the underlying attributes. So for example, the dog example, you do initial as dog name equal to something, age equal to something, breed equal to something. So this is inside of initial function. Then all the rest of function can interact with this particular initial function. You can print the dog name, you can print dog age, and print the dog breed. Initial file. Oh, okay. Underneath initial file. Let me see. Did we introduce the niche file here? I think no. When we introduced the double leading and double trailing function, we mentioned those are the magic object or attribute used in the user control space. So I don't think I have initial files here. Okay, I think someone passed a new module link. Let me look it up if we have initial file. No. Okay, got it. Okay, great, awesome. I want to be respectful for everyone's time, and thank you so much for joining today. Hope everyone have a great night, and looking forward to hear from you. Bye, guys.